The beginning of this story, from a literary perspective, well, our boy Mark was no Dickens or Faulkner or Maya Angelou or anything. The Greek of it, the original Greek, goes like this. They came to Jericho, and as they left Jericho, now our translation tries to smooth it out a little bit. It puts the disciples and the large crowd in between the going to Jericho and leaving Jericho, but Mark didn't write it that way. They came to Jericho. They left Jericho. It's like a children's book. Now, in our Bible study this week, we were talking about this, our staff Bible study, and Tim had an interesting suggestion about why Mark writes it that way. With the coming to Jericho and the leaving Jericho right next to each other. And he says, that's because what happens in Jericho stays in Jericho. This is not the right answer. I take this line as evidence of the truth of the gospel stories. Let me show you what I mean. Mark is not writing, obviously, you can tell, some work of literary genius. He's just trying to tell us what happened, how he remembers it. And Jericho is in his mind like a cognitive waypoint. It's a physical place to anchor the progression of the story. It's like a mental handhold. It's as if you or I were telling somebody a story, and we're like, well, all right, then we went to Buc-ee's, and as we were leaving Buc-ee's, that's when Bartimaeus called. As long as we're talking about Bartimaeus, this is another place where you can tell Mark, really could have used an editor, but he's just trying to tell us what happened. Bartimaeus is not even a real name, y'all. Bartimaeus is Aramaic for son of Timaeus, which is the thing he tells us in the next 3 words. It's like he's a son of Timaeus, son of Timaeus. It's repetitive. He's saying the same thing all over again. It's like if you were to say William's son, right? It's another place in the same verse where you have to realize, Mark cannot be pulling one over on us. Literary polish is not hiding anything here. We're getting this story pretty much exactly as it appears in Mark's brain, just dumped out onto the paper. And I think this is good. I like this about the gospel, of Mark in particular, because the rawness of the text I take as evidence of its truth. Fiction would be better written. And the truth of this story is important because the rest of this passage is a healing miracle, right? That Jesus really did, that really happened. Now, as far as healing stories go, this particular one is not too terribly complicated. So I don't want to repeat the whole story. I want to point out 2 things about Jesus in this miracle, 2 ways that Jesus acts. And I want to point out that when we try, in our own way at St. Andrew's, to act in the same way, we build treasure in heaven. Okay? So first, Bartimaeus cannot see. It's obviously enough the problem in the story. Everybody else, though, can see Bartimaeus. They just rather not. They really wish he would just be quiet and stop talking so that they can go back to ignoring him. Surely Mark's phrase here, Mark says, many sternly ordered him to be quiet, is diplomatically put. I'll say this much. When I sternly order my children to be quiet, I do not do it by calmly saying, I hereby sternly command you to stop vocalizing. They want him to be quiet. They're yelling at him to be quiet so they can go back to not seeing him. He can't see them. They don't want to see him and his problems. But Jesus sees him. Jesus not only sees the one who cannot see, but he sees the one that no one else wants to see. Now, when we seek to be the hands and feet of Jesus, then we also must stop and love those who are unseen. And there are many in our society who are unseen, and many more still who are seen only in terms of the jobs they do for us, but not in terms of their personhood or people in need. So, for example, you probably do not see the backup mailman, the one who delivers the mail on Fridays at St. Andrew's, who runs in here covered in sweat from the afternoon heat to drop off the package, and then on the way out, stops the little white mail truck at the little free pantry so we can get dinner. You also may not see the special ed teacher's aide who works full-time, whose take-home pay amounts to less than $15,000 a year, which makes it hard to make the ends meet. So every day on the way to work, she stops at the little free pantry and gets out a snack for the middle of the day. Just one little snack on her way to work. It'd be great if there were no need for the McKinney little free pantry. But at least by having it there, by donating food to put in it, by trying to keep it from being a mud pit like we did last week at the work day, at least we see that there are people who need it. You know where else there are people who deserve to be seen? In our schools, particularly our Title I elementary schools, like our partner school, Berks Elementary. Now, I show you this is Connect 4, because Connect 4 is one of the ways that our mentors, who spend time each and every week with students in need of support and encouragement and guidance, it's one of the ways our mentors begin to break down the barriers when they meet a mentee and get to know the student with whom they're working. And Connect 4 is great at this because it's simple and it's quick, and also elementary school students, particularly young ones, are very easy to beat. I'm joking. Sort of. All my mentees learned about losing at Connect 4, among other things. But really, it's just one small concrete example of the way our mentors go into a building into which most people never cast a shadow and see kids whom most of us never see and sit down at the other side of the library table from them and say, "How are you? What do you need?" Or as Jesus says to Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" Now, look, we at St. Andrews, we have not solved hunger or education or the working poor. I'm not claiming that, the fixing of those things, as our treasure in heaven. I just call these treasures in heaven because there are ways where we have seen or tried to see as Jesus sees, to see the person rather than look past the problem. Now, Jesus, of course, not only sees Bartimaeus, who cannot see and who no one wants to see, Jesus sees him and asks him what he wants and then heals him. All right, I'll be honest. I don't have a treasure in there that's exactly the same as Bartimaeus getting instantaneously healed from blindness. But Jesus does still heal. And some of these stories may be closer to that than you imagine. This is a steering wheel. All right, let's be honest. It's a steering wheel cover. Imagine with me. This is a steering wheel. I actually have lots of good steering wheel treasure in heaven stories. I think that's because we live in suburbia, and for us, cars are like sheep and goats were to the people of Jesus' time. They're everywhere. So I have lots of good steering wheel stories where people's lives have been dramatically changed by God like nudging them to turn here or something. But this story begins before this woman ever climbed behind the wheel. It's probably best to begin it in that just maelstrom, that terrible storm of hormones and mental and physical exhaustion and enormous demands of holding it all together that are placed on new mothers. The clinical term for it is postpartum depression, but the clinical words fail to capture the experience of being pushed right up to the brink, pushed to the point of telling off your spouse, pushed to the point of yelling at the kids, pushed to the point of leaving the house, pushed to the point of getting in the car and jamming the keys in the ignition and stepping on the gas. And at this point in the story, it's not a depression, it's like a sinkhole. And she has a deep and terrifying longing to get out, just any way out. So as the transmission jumps from gear to gear with hands on the wheel, the question becomes, what would happen if, say, I just turned into that tree or that barrier? Could I find a place where my body won't hurt, where nobody demands anything of me, where God will be? Could I just drive straight to my eternal home right now? At this point, Jesus speaks to her. He speaks from the passenger seat. Now, the passenger seat, mind you, is empty, but the voice comes directly from the passenger seat. And Jesus says, "Call her. She is home." No, I can't call her. I can handle this myself. I can just drive into that truck. And Jesus says again, "No, call her, and also turn left." And so between big, gasping sobs, she calls this other woman from St. Andrew's, and she turns left. Now, 20 minutes later, she is on the floor of this other living room. She is still weeping. She's still tired. She still hurts. But she is alive. That healing is not quite as fast as Bartimaeus's, but she is still here today because Jesus spoke to her and used his church and the relationships in it to work his miracle. This story, this life still being lived today in our community, this precious woman is one of God's heavenly treasures. Sorry, I have my own tiny part in this story, and when you are that close to just the miraculous work of God reaching down into the world, it's very powerful. Look, I know there's a lot of work around this place that involves stuffing Logan into blow-up dragon costumes and writing sock puppet jokes and cutting cardstock for the women's retreats. But sometimes God takes the relationships and the prayers and the knowledge that is built along the way through all of that, and saves a life. We do much more around here than any one person can see, even the rector person. I hope, though, in pulling some things out of this box in the last 3 weeks, you have found something of your sight restored. And like Bartimaeus at the end of our passage, now that you can see, you're ready to leap up and follow Jesus on the way.